I've spent the last few years going deep on slow running, Maffetone training, zone 2, full aerobic base building. And I've made a lot of videos about all of it. And the whole time there's been a question sitting in the back of my mind that I've been avoiding. Are zone 2 and the Maffetone method actually the same thing? Everybody online seems to use them interchangeably. And I did too for a while. But the more I trained and the longer I ran, and the more I realized that they're not the same thing. There are actual differences, and those differences actually matter for how you train day to day, month to month, and year to year. So in this video, I'm going to do something I don't usually do. I'm going to think through this out loud, and I'm going to compare both methods honestly to myself based on my own experience. And by the end, I'm going to tell you which one I'm actually going to use moving forward. I don't have an answer yet, but let's work it out together, shall we? Before I get into the differences, let me explain why I'm even asking this question. When I started using the Maffetone method training 6 years ago, and my 30, 60, 90 day, even one full year of MAF training, which I've documented in a few videos, and even my last video, I kept seeing zone 2 mentioned everywhere, and I made videos on the topic. You know, podcasters, running forums, coaching articles, and even people were talking about it were like, hey, it's the same thing. Don't worry. It's all in that correct zone. You know, it's basically your Maffetone method. Is it the same heart rate, same effort, same benefits, just different names, different models, different training plans? But then I started noticing the numbers didn't quite line up. And the philosophy behind each method, when you actually dig into it, comes from very different places and from very different people. Zone 2 is a product of exercise physiology research. It's clinical. It comes from a lab testing, lactate threshold, metabolic rate, metabolic efficiency, like technical real terms like science. The Maffetone method comes from a coach, Phil Maffetone, who worked with endurance athletes for decades and developed this approach through observation, experimentation, and a very specific philosophy about health and aerobic function. Same destination maybe, but very different maps. So let me break down where they actually differ and where my experience tells me one works better than the other. Let's start with zone 2 because honestly, it has a lot going on for it in a good way. Zone 2 is defined by the intensity at which you are primarily using your aerobic system. Burning fat, producing energy efficiently without significant lactate accumulation. And look, there's most models that put it at roughly about 60 to 70% of your maximum heart rate. And look, the science behind it is solid. Researchers like this dude right here have done serious work showing that training in zone 2 builds mitochondria, mitochondrial density. More mitochondria in your cells means a more powerful aerobic engine. Look, it's not just like bro science. It's well supported physiology. From a practical standpoint, zone 2 is also flexible. Different coaches use slightly different formulas. Some use percentage of max heart rate, some use percentage of heart rate reserve using lactate testing in a lab. The principle is consistent, even if the exact numbers vary by model. Even the Karvonen formula comes into play. That can really help figure out all of your zones. And for most recreational runners, zone 2 is approachable. You don't need to know anything about a specific coach or method. You just need to know what your max heart rate is and keep your effort in the right zone. In my own training, when I've run in what I'd call zone 2 based on a percentage of max heart rate and heart rate reserve, I've used both. It felt generally sustainable, comfortable. I could hold a full conversation. That's the basic check, I would say. I've also been able to use it when I run on a trail, which for me, I don't know, that's a pretty happy place because trail running is not easy. There's a lot of hills, a lot of rocks, a lot of roots. And you know what? I'll come to that a little at the end of this video. Okay, so what's the issue? Why am I not just calling it zone 2 and like leaving it there? Because it seems like that's a good place to call it, right? It's because the zone itself is quite wide, and where you sit within that zone really matters more than most people realize. Now, the Maffetone method takes a different approach. Instead of a zone, a range, you get a single number. Your MAF heart rate is 180 minus your age, which with individual adjustments. You don't train in a zone around that number. Maybe you kind of do. You train at or below it. The ceiling really is firm. When I first calculated my MAF heart rate and tried to run at that, I realized something important. My MAF number sat at the low end of what most zone 2 calculations would give me. Sometimes even below zone 2, depending on which formula I used. And look, that's not a coincidence. The Maffetone method is deliberately conservative. The philosophy is that most people, even experienced runners, have a weaker aerobic base than they actually think. And the only way to build it properly is to stay lower than feels necessary for longer than feels comfortable. Hence the frustration. Look, there's also something else baked into the Maffetone method that zone 2 doesn't really address. And that's the MAF test. The monthly time trial at your MAF heart rate gives you an objective measure of aerobic progress that doesn't really rely on how you feel or what your watch estimates. When I started doing the MAF test, I had data. I had real comparable monthly data, and watching that pace improve at the same heart rate, it was the most motivating and rewarding thing that I've experienced in all my years as being a runner. Okay, other than doing really well in a race. But zone 2 training doesn't come with that built-in feedback loop. You can train in zone 2 for months and have no structured way to measure whether your aerobic base is actually improving. That, for me, is a very meaningful difference. And not only do you have those results, but you can also change things up if you're really struggling and do the 2-week Maffetone diet, and it'll do a food elimination to see what's going on with your body and what foods react to you and how they react. Because that, for a lot of people, is important as well, because as we get older, we seem to have a lot more problems with the foods that we're eating and what triggers more inflammation, what gives us, belly bloat or any of those things. Now, here's where it gets complicated and where I've generally gone back and forth with all of this. Zone 2 is more flexible, which sounds like a benefit, but can flexibility become an excuse if your zone 2 is 130 to 155 beats per minute? It's very easy to drift into higher and tell yourself, hey, I'm still in zone 2. Technically correct, but you might be spending most of your time at the top end of the zone, which is closer to the gray zone 3 territory than your true aerobic development. Now, that may not be a problem in itself, but if you're running at that higher level all the time, it could be a recipe for an injury or a burnout or the things that the Maffetone method helps alleviate. The Maffetone method removes that ambiguity. One number, stay under it, no negotiation. On the other hand, the 180 formula is a formula. It doesn't know you. It doesn't account for your individual physiology, your fitness history in detail, or the specific way your body responds to training in volume. Some runners find their MAF number feels too restrictive. Others find it sits naturally in the middle of their zone 2 anyways. And some people think it's too fast. Look, there's the thing I keep coming back to. In a lab with proper lactate testing, you get a precise individual zone 2 ceiling. For most of us who aren't elite athletes with access to sports science labs, the Maffetone method is remarkably good approximation of that number. Imperfect, yes, but close enough to be useful. So which is it, right? I think actually that's the wrong question to be asking. Here's where I've landed on this one. And I want it to be clear that this is my personal experience and not a prescription for everybody, because all of us runners come from different backgrounds and all different fitness levels. Zone 2 gave me the concept. Maffetone gave me the practice. Understanding Zone 2, the science, the physiology, why aerobic-based training works, helped me believe in slow running before I committed to it. That intellectual framework matters. I needed to understand the why before I could trust the process. That's what was going on through my head before I started this. But when it came to actually training day, the Maffetone method is what I used because it gave me a number, a test, a system. It removed the ambiguity that I know I would have exploited if I stayed in a wide Zone 2 range. I think a lot of runners use Zone 2 as a concept and the Maffetone method as an implementation. Again, my opinions. Whether they realize it or not, I think that's actually fine. They're comparable. They're pointing at the same thing from different angles. But if you're watching me, which one changed my running? It was the Maffetone method because it made me accountable to a specific number, and it gave me a way to measure the progress that didn't depend on how I felt or what condition I was running in. That said, if the 180 formula feels wrong for you, your Zone 2 numbers from a different method might make more sense for your body, for those that the principles matter more than the formula. Keep your easy runs generally easy, measure your progress, be patient, and all will be fine. The sun will come out tomorrow. That's the method, whatever you call it. I'm curious, where did you land on this? Are you Zone 2 person? A Maffetone person? Have you tried both and noticed a difference? I'd love to know. Drop it in the comments section. I read everyone. And this is exactly the kind of conversation I started this channel to have. If you want to see the 90-day MAF experiment that led me to all of this, that video is linked below. And if you're just starting out and wanting to understand why your easy runs are probably too fast, the first video in the series is there as well. Now, I did promise you that I would tell you at the end of the video about Zone 2 in trail running. The Maffetone method is fantastic, in my experience, for road running. To run slow, to build your aerobic base. But if you take it out on a trail, if you take this method, the concept, and you head out on a trail, I find that the Maffetone method is so much harder than running in Zone 2. And the reason is because of all the hills. There's so many. I mean, seriously, when was the last time you tried running up a hill for more than 10 seconds and not have your heart rate start going up so fast that you're thinking you're going to have a heart attack? Like, seriously, it is very, very difficult. And so I find that if I were to push myself to try get up that hill by running, this Maffetone method wouldn't work. And then I realized, oh, okay, well, I'll just hike up all the hills because that's what we as trail runners do, right? In most cases. But then I felt I got really discouraged by just hiking all the time because I ended up like the run turned into more of a hike because there's so many hills and it's the stopping and the starting and the, right? If I just wanted to run continuously, the Maffetone method on just the road or in a neighborhood or on the streets or whatever, I found just on flat ground around a track would work really, really well because I could see everything clearly. And why the heck is it snowing? You gotta be kidding me. It's flipping May. Welcome to Canada, man. If you don't like the weather, wait 5 minutes. This is crazy. The Maffetone method works really well if you've got flat ground. Let me get out of the wind. If it's got flat ground, you're good. But as soon as you add in hills, then it can get very discouraging because then you're hiking more than anything else. But the thing that I didn't understand when I first started this was it doesn't matter if you're running or hiking or walking. If your heart rate is elevated and it's, as long as it's in your aerobic zone, that's all that matters. However, there's a problem with that. Walking is very different. Walking and power walking and hiking is very different than running. It's very different. You're using different muscles. So that's a challenge too, right? Because you want to be a runner. So you go to run and you find it's too hard to do the Maffetone method. So then you're like, okay, I'm going to hike. And then, but you're hiking, you're not being a runner. It's just a weird thing, right? So that's one of the challenges with the Maffetone method. However, if you use zone 2 and you use the Karvonen formula that uses heart rate reserve to find your maximum heart rate, and then you could figure out the zones. And I've made a video on this. Maybe I'll make another one because videos seem to get lost and there's a lot of new people here as well. So I always like to include everybody into the topic and the conversation. So zone 2 gives me a wider range, which would allow me to run up the hills. So it sounds counterproductive in a way. Maffetone gives me this, but zone 2 gives me, I don't know, so much more, which would allow me to be able to do more running while I'm on the trails. But then how much is too much? Because if it gives me too much, then I start taking it for granted and then I end up in that gray zone. And then I start running way too fast all the time and I end up back in the injury box that started this whole thing about not being injured. It's a weird thing. So, you know, if you're alone and you go into a candy store and you have no one else with you, no one to judge you, are you going to eat some more candy? Are you going to buy some more candy than what you would do if you were with your family or your friends and they're going to judge you or something, right? Is that some people have a problem with that when no one's around to kind of, maybe stop them from eating so much junk. Maybe they're like, I don't care. I'm going to eat whatever I want. But then some people are with their family and then it's like, everyone's watching me. Maybe I should not. And so that's the thing. It's like running. If you've got that extra to use, then you will use it. And if you don't, you don't. It's like when my watch was having problems a number of years ago, and all of a sudden I didn't have any heart rate data. I was like, oh, okay, well, I guess I'm just running by perceived effort. Well, the perceived effort, see, if I didn't know what my perceived effort was, using a heart rate so I could see it, I would probably have a real problem when it came time to my watch being broken, that I wouldn't know what was easy. I don't know, these are just thoughts and feelings about both of those, right? Trying to formulate it and talk it through with all of you. And so that's my take. It's my take on both of those formulas. Look, we all get there one way or the other. Some people are just going to say, you know what, just get out and run. Just get out and run. Get out and run. Just be consistent. Get out and run. But other people can't just do that. We're not all the same. We operate differently. How we're raised, what part of the world we're from, our upbringing, our body issues that we have, our food intolerances that we have. Like, we're so different, so it's so hard to kind of give advice to people. I'm just sharing what works for me and some of the thought patterns I go through in wanting to, use these different methods to be able to run faster at a low heart rate, build my aerobic base, be able to run a 10K, run a half marathon, run a marathon, and run an ultra marathon. That's just me. All right. I think enough being said. I'm going to get out and run myself. And then I got to go to a horse show. Jumping. Like I always say, get out and run. Thanks for being here.